in the morning. Eddie. All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order today, Monday, January 9th, 2023, 7 o'clock. First item up for discussion, I asked our clerk to print off the calendar of resolutions that he'd been so kind to put together and circulate towards the end of the year. Just wanted to get a sense from council if there were any additions, corrections, modifications, any subtractions, or if we're good with this, et cetera. Yes, Ms. Bowers.
There was one additional resolution that I plan to work on with community members to recognize Urban Beekeeping Awareness Month. I'm targeting for July, but I'll be working on that with some community members.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor.
Mr. Chair, would it be possible for me to get a list of the resolutions so that as I go through our proclamations for the year, I don't like to duplicate efforts, or if there's a possibility of joining in on one, I like to try to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Clerk, would you mind shooting over that list that you printed?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Anyone else on that one?
Do we intend to do the same list then as, or mostly replicate 2022? Is that the intention at this point?
I think so. That would be my intent unless there's a reason not to. I mean, I know there's a couple of, for example, there's a couple of different arts aspects that I might swap out for different artistic adventure for another, so.
Oh, we have the library coming up,
Oh, yeah, yes.
the library
That's
in
the-
March.
Yes, I think that's a good
March.
point. Mhm.
Yeah.
A resolution in March commemorating the opening of the new library.
It's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Just generally, I just want to comment that I appreciate everyone's participation in these resolutions. I know sometimes it feels maybe performative, but I do think that it means something to the people who are receiving them, and it certainly draws people into council chamber, and that helps encourage breaking down those barriers, I think, between people participating in their local government. So I do see value to this, and I do appreciate and thank you for your time on these resolutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Okay. Items from council office. We had two resolutions here. I want to thank Mr. Clerk for putting together the resolution recognizing Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Any thoughts or comments? Are we good for consent on that? Okay. Next one, resolution recognizing January as National Blood Donor Month. I actually took the liberty of putting this one together. January is National Blood Donor Month, and I encourage folks who are able and eligible to give blood. I've seen a lot of it does seem like there's always a shortage, but I've seen a lot going around lately that there is indeed quite the shortage. So any feedback is greatly appreciated.
Thank you for the reminder.
Consent okay for both of those resolutions? Okay. All right, items from the Department of Engineering. Looks like we've got several. Director Comlink.
Good evening. Good evening, Chair Weaver, members of council. I got 4 items in front of you this evening. I believe the first item is requesting acceptance of a water line easement in the Pizarro Park Buckles Tract area. We have found that this easement inadvertently was not recorded. The water line improvements are in the ground servicing the area. As we're working through with the potential development along the Buckles track, it was uncovered that it had not been recorded. So we're requesting the emergency and waiver so that we can get this to the county and get it recorded.
Okay. Any questions from colleagues? Consent okay? Okay. And emergency and waiver on that, please, Jeremy. Thank you. Okay, next one, please, Director.
Next item is requesting permission to bid the 2023 street maintenance program. There's a visual map of the streets that we anticipate for or are proposing for rebuild, our asphalt mill and overlay, crack seal, slurry seal, which is preventative maintenance, and we're also going to be assisting the Parks and Recreation Department with some parking lot work up at Woodside Green. I believe it's Woodside Green. Any questions?
Questions from colleagues?
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. McGregor.
The lot where the old FOP was, I know that's the church owns it, but a lot of people that use the parks park there. Have we looked at maybe sharing a cost to have that repaved? It's in pretty bad condition. I mean, is that something we could?
We have attempted several times to have conversations with Stony Brook. I know they went through a pastoral change there. And so when we had reached out about that, they were just getting, one pastor was getting ready to leave. Then they asked if we waited till the new one came in. Then we reached out to the new one, and they still were trying to get their feet settled. So we will continue to pick that up, that conversation again. I don't know that there was, I think there's some concern around their future use and how that would encumber them or prevent them for future use, but we'll continue that dialogue. Because I know people think that we own that property because it's at the trailhead there. And if there's a way that we can work something out for use of that and then for future, you know, if they want to eventually develop that, there's certainly opportunities and options we can discuss.
Thank you.
Questions? Director, is this about on same scale, scope as recent history, previous years?
I want to say it's around $4 million in overall effort. And depending on bid environment, so we'll see.
It's a motion. Is everybody good with consent? Okay.
And yes, it isn't about the same scope as the previous 2 years.
Thank you.
The next item is permission to bid the Havens Corners water line replacement. This project was anticipated to be a 2022 project. However, given staffing and adjustments, we're now in a position to bring this project forward. There's been several water line breaks on this line, and we're wanting to replace it.
Yes, Ms. Padova.
I had a question. Just curious, what's typically like the lifespan of these water lines? Is 60 years about average?
It depends on the material type. water lines that have been installed in the 60s typically are in the 60, 65 year. And when you have old cast iron pipe, that's what we're historically seeing. The newer ductile iron pipe and some of the PVC pipe, that's extending well past 100 years is the foreseeable useful life. So we're looking to go with a more modern material, cement line, ductile iron pipe, depending on material availability, or CB PVC pipe, depending on availability of the water line, all meeting AWWA standards.
Thank you.
Ms. McGregor?
My question was, what kind of material were you going to use, the ductile iron, or is there other?
So we will have, within our standards, we have cement line ductile iron pipe is one of the water line materials, and PVC is another alternative material that is used within the community. The PVC lines do have a challenge being traced, so we add a tracer wire with those so that we know where they are to locate those in the future.
And then, I don't know if this county will ever get around to widening, but will this be okay where it is if they decide to widen Havens Corner?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Everybody okay with consent for that as well? All right, Director.
Okay. And the last item is kind of a two-parter. We opened bids for the 2021 sidewalk maintenance program, and the cost came in 9.7% over the engineer's estimate. However, kind of digging back and researching what was notified to the residents, we saw a cost increase of a little over 13% to the residents, given the timing of when that estimate was prepared back early in the past spring, and just getting to bid in December with construction activity occurring or slated to occur in 2023. I will note that while it's about a 13.5% increase, not every parcel would necessarily, it's not an equal weighted distribution to each individual parcel. We saw the joint repair was nearly double the unit cost of what was originally anticipated. So some parcels had the joint repair, others did not. So some parcels could see a significant increase within this. Given the time and delay, just open to a conversation with council whether or not there'd be an appetite in the city picking up that cost differential, understanding the time and delay that this has been over a year now, and the time that we've been working towards this project. And this is the first phase, so kind of on the learning curve associated with establishing a program.
And if I could just tag on to that, you know, part of, as Director Comleck mentioned, there has been a delay from the time we initially received the first estimates to when it actually went to bid. I might remind council that the engineering department went through a rather tumultuous year. Last year, we went from 5 engineers down to 1. And I know that Councilman Renner can attest that finding engineers in Franklin County these days are like finding a needle in a haystack. But part of that delay was due to that transition that we were going through, from losing Mr. Moorhead and then Ms. Ridge, and then hiring Director Comleck and him being able to get his arms around that. So that's not something likely to repeat itself as we go forward, but we did have the conversation internally and wanted to ask council as to what the will of council might be with regard to absorbing that $46,000 differential as we work through this very first year of the program, given the challenges that we had, not only in getting this implemented, but certainly the staffing challenges that we had with that.
Additionally, I wanted to add to that at the time that we provided notice to council in regards to the anticipated cost of construction for the city's portion, there were some omissions from that notice. Maintenance of traffic was not included within that, and there's roughly 20,000, 19,000 of expenditures associated with maintenance of traffic, which is predominantly at the ADA wheelchair ramps at each intersection, as well as the tree removals will require some MOT to get vehicular traffic around while trees are being removed in the area. So that is a city expense, as well as the curb and gutter adjacent to those ADA ramps as well. So there were costs that were not recognized at the time that this was brought forward in May, and those costs are up here and just under 40,000 there.
And did you speak to the budget amount?
The engineer's estimate for the project was around 503,000. We have enough to cover the overall project. When we add the 10% contingency to the project, we're going to need slightly more. I want to say it was around $35,000 worth of addition to bring us up to the traditional 10% contingency. And hopefully we will not need the contingency as we go forward.
So the original budgeted amount actually covers all of this, but the 30,000 supplemental would just be needed for the contingency.
Correct.
Colleagues, Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, if I could just make sure I summarize and so that I have a correct understanding. This is year one still that we're discussing.
Correct.
And if I recall correctly, last year we received in our packets a list of every resident and each estimate that had been projected for each of the parcels. At that time, which gave me a little bit of a sticker shock because it was certainly higher than I thought I was anticipating in terms of impact to residents. So the additional $46,500, that is above that spreadsheet that we saw with each
Correct.
Identified parcel.
And it's not an even distribution.
Yeah.
Because as I pointed out, the joint repair was nearly double the cost that we originally anticipated. So
Yeah.
if a parcel had significant joint repairs, they could see $1,000, $1,200 additional cost than what they otherwise were projecting.
Had this gone forward on the initial timeline that we had hoped to be able to provide, would the residents not have seen that $46,000 cost?
They likely would have seen some of it, but I think just with the material and labor escalations that we're seeing in the market, that we would have seen a reduced cost. I
Yeah.
can't tell you what that exactly would have been, but the delay is part of it.
And then do we think that going forward that we're going to see quite as wide a discrepancy between those estimates and then the actual costs? Or are residents going to maybe be able to have a better confidence that those numbers that they get estimated are going to be those actual
So now
construction
that-
costs?
So now that we have hard bids, we can utilize that information to help inform the 2022 program, which will also be constructed within calendar year 2023. So these bids, as well as unit prices obtained from our street maintenance program, will go to provide those costs.
I think for me, given all of that, and that particularly that residents had already maybe budgeted or planned for certain costs, and that there's some responsibility, I think, I appreciate the administration actually bringing this forward to council and requesting this. I think that this is an important aspect that we can provide some support to our residents. So I would be fully in support of supplementing that additional cost.
Mrs. McGregor.
I agree with, is there a way we could just everything's gone up everywhere. Even if we didn't have this long delay, it might have been different. An estimate's an estimate, it might be the same, might be lower, a little bit higher. Is there a way we could do like a 1 or 2% or 3% increase, and would that be prohibitive to do that? And then we just take responsibility for the rest? At least, I'm not saying half and half, but just increase it a little bit for.
Well, I think we'd have to look into the data. As I mentioned, there are some parcels that may have seen a decrease in their overall cost. However, there were a significant number of parcels that had this joint repair where the cost doubled. If you look, and I don't have the information readily, and I can prepare this and provide this to you, the cost associated with the 6-inch thick concrete walk at the driveway approaches, that was slightly higher than our original engineer's estimate, as well as the 4-inch walk. Again, the biggest cost differential and the unit cost was associated with that joint repair. So those that had joint repair on their parcel would see a significant increase. So giving them 1-2% would be really small comparative. Because I believe I looked at one of the parcels had $1,500 above what they otherwise would have had, and it was based off of the joint repair that they had on their parcel. It was a property on Daventry, I believe.
I guess I mean, if it happens again and prices keep going up, I just hate to give estimates again, and then every time we have to pay the difference because the estimate is like not quite as accurate as it should be. And then people say, well, you did it last year, why aren't you doing it this year?
If I could, Councilwoman, we had that discussion internally and when we were discussing whether to present this to council and how to present this to council. And I think the differentiating factor with this year is it's the very first year of the program. We were going into it trying to sort through when the original estimate numbers came in. I do remember Assistant City Engineer Caitlin Ridge at the time was going back through the numbers and trying to work through the numbers to totally understand them, and then compounding that with the delay that we had with the staff transitioning. That is not likely to continue in future years. I would hope you're not going anywhere, Mr. Comline. So I think that is what differentiates this year versus future years. But because I had the same concern too, is are we setting a precedent? But I think this is a very unique circumstance, given the fact that this is the first year of the program and that we have had these multiple challenges around this first year. With the new timeline that Director Comline has set out for the future sidewalk programs, beginning with the 2022 program, I think the timeline will be much tighter.
Yes, Ms. Padova.
The unrecognized costs that you were talking about, are those part of this 13% increase, or is that outside of the increase?
So the 13.4% increase is taking the original 493 up to the 392 962.75. So that is a 13.4% increase above what they originally saw back in May.
Okay, so that, the 46,000, that number includes like the nearly $20,000 you,
No,
is that what?
The items down below are all unrecognized costs that otherwise would have been attributable to the city.
Okay, gotcha. So us covering those unrecognized costs, that doesn't change anything for the residents? That's
Correct.
still good, okay.
So, and you can see that the city's cost went up as a result of the bid, plus the costs that were not recognized in May. I believe it was May of last year.
Mr. Schnetzer.
So I'll just say I kind of agree with perhaps the moral justification and behind your suggestion, but I'm just curious if perhaps we should look beyond this specific instance or this specific program year and maybe some input from the city attorney's office on whether or not this legally sets a precedent that might cascade or domino in future years as we look at decades worth of, I guess, sidewalk maintenance program years and stuff. So I don't know if Mr. Roth, if you have anything that, contemporaneous you can kind of speak to, or if you need to do some research, that's certainly fine as well.
Yeah, I haven't looked into any of this specifically, just my prior experience, there's always going to be claims that there's a precedent whenever you do something extraordinary in one part of town, another part of town's gonna want that. But I think there's justification here. I mean, we're doing the 2021 sidewalk program in 2023. We're not gonna be doing that on each of the successive phases, hopefully. So I don't think there's anything legally binding on us to do it for anyone in the future, but there will be claims that we should. I'm sure of that.
Thank you.
And so it is my goal for a few, and again, we've got to get the 21 program moving forward. The 2022 program, I hope to bring forward to City Council in February. And then on the heels of that, over the summer, as we're evaluating the 2024 program, to be in a position to provide notice to the residents that they're in the program area in late summer, to give them the opportunity during the fall up to around Thanksgiving to perform that work on their own, should they choose to do so. And then at this point in time, next year in 2024, be bidding out the program for the 24 program is how I conceive that moving forward.
Have you found that the people that are doing it on their own are paying less than?
I do not have cost associated with their private work.
No, just wondering.
Mrs. Padova?
So similarly, how many people, do you know what the number was of how many people are decided to do it on their own versus how many opted into this?
I can get that number. It's been kind of a moving target. Folks have opted out, and then we went to do inspections, and they had not performed, so they're in the program. So I can get
Okay.
that number and have that available for next week.
Okay, and do you think that people opting out made this go up at all, or was it simply the cost of materials?
I understand that there are some areas where they co-opt, where a group of residents got together and hired a contractor to perform work in a given area to get economies of scale. But as a part of the permit process, we didn't capture the associated cost with that private work.
Okay.
But I can get a number in regards to, I believe there were 219 parcels within the 2021 program, and I can find out the number that were opted out and provide that to council.
Thank you.
Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, so I think it seems that it's really, and again, this is repeating, I think, what's been discussed, but why this will be critical then to have good estimates out to residents for future program years. But I'm wondering too, have you seen any kind of contracting with our contractor that would restrict or get them to agree to sort of limit their cost, their final project cost, so to encourage accurate bidding and accurate estimates?
So we have unit prices associated with the scope and breadth of work, and we will have construction administration, while they'll be actually taking the quantities of actual field measurements that will go against the actual installed work in the field. And that's the quality assurance and quality control during the course of construction.
Would there be any potential that a contractor would agree to limit their final cost to that 10% contingency?
I'm hoping that we can keep it, at cost.
Okay.
The contingencies there for unforeseen site conditions, and hopefully we don't encounter that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think for me, I think it's probably the appropriate thing to build in, or to cover the cost here, just given the length of the delay, and hopefully as we learn from our first year's program, we will not have that that significant delay, and have more accurate bids, as Director Comlink was saying, and won't run into this issue moving forward, but I do feel it's probably the appropriate path forward for this year's program, or for the 2021 program. Any other comments from my colleagues? Okay, thank you, Director, and I believe that's all we had for this evening, so thank you. See you next week. Oh, I'm sorry, do we want consent with that? On for first and then consent? Okay, yep, first and then consent.
Is that the same for the supplemental, too?
I'm sorry. First and then consent for the supplemental as well? Okay, all right, thank you, everyone.